Angelina Jolie, Part 3. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, continuing my examination of a wealth of evidence to make a determination as to whether Angelina Jolie is a narcissist or is she something else. We're dealing with the period of when she was at high school, and it was described that she lived in an apartment on the wrong side of Beverly Hills, not where really rich people lived. She was deliberately different and did not want anything to do with the rich kids. She was described as having a serious thing with knives. All kinds of knives, pen knives, kitchen knives. Apparently she would carry them and then, whilst engaging in a conversation with somebody, would just whip out one of these knives and start to play with it. That might be viewed as a behaviour that falls outside of conforming with social norms and evidences unlawful behaviours. It might also be triangulating people with an object in order to provoke a response from them. The fact is that she certainly didn't feel as though she would fit in. She didn't want to hang out at the places, for instance, the Beverly Center, which was the enormous shopping mall in West Hollywood, or Rodeo Drive for girls with daddy's credit card. She was separate and distinct from all of that. And she admitted herself that I was that punk in school. I didn't feel clean and pretty. And I always felt interesting or odd or dark. I beat my black boots and my ripped jeans and my old jacket, and I felt more comfortable like that. I wasn't going to pretend to be the smart, clean-scented girl. I could understand the darker things, the more moody things, the more emotional things. Expressing that view, is that demonstrative of believing that she could understand more than other people? It ended up with Jolie being looked down upon for daring to be different. But her refusal to conform to the fashion around her is something that was clear, that made her peers somewhat scared of her, because she did not take social boundaries remotely seriously. Again, this failure to account for social boundaries bleeds into a lack of boundary recognition. Remember, there are plenty of people that would not fit with fashion etiquette or social boundaries in that way, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they are a narcissist. But what it does show is another indicator with regard to a failure to abide by boundaries. Jolie was attending therapy at this juncture, and was attending sometimes 3 times a week. Her attitude towards it was almost as if she was attending a class for science. By all accounts, it was reported on that the therapy had no impact whatsoever. Indeed, a commentator expressed the view that they thought that the therapist would need therapy as a consequence of their involvement with Jolie. The fact that she was attending therapy that got nowhere may well denote a personality that was impervious to the impact of therapy, which could again support a narcissistic approach. One individual recounting Jolie's behaviours explained, "I'm not saying she wasn't wild, she was. But she also had a kind of vulnerability and a lot of pain. I think she was deeply hurt by the breakup of her parents and the fact that her father moved on with his life and, for the most part, left her behind. He would occasionally show up and take her out. They went to the Oscars one year, but she wanted a full-time dad, not an Oscars date. It hurt her and made her put on a toughest front as possible so as not to show the pain. The absence of her father could have contributed to a lack of control environment. It may simply be that this tough front that she put on was her way of coping. Or might this have been the way that her narcissism was dealing with it, by presenting a particular front to deal with the wounding that was caused by the repeated absence of her father? The source continues to explain about Jolie by saying that she had a deep-rooted ambition. She was very smart and in her own way disciplined. She got into acting very quickly and was successful by 15 or 16. She always said she wanted not to follow in her dad's footsteps, but to outdo him, which she did. That is demonstrative of competitiveness, which is a further indicator. Her uncle, Chip Taylor, said, "Angie was always the kind of kid that would like to think she was tough. But I never looked at her as a tough kid because I've been around real punk kids, and she was like a kid from Hollywood doing a little performance in her biker clothes." Might this be indicative of a chameleon that is shape-shifting in order to put forward a particular view? Her first serious boyfriend didn't exactly fit into the high school jock mould. She could do just about anything she wanted as a teenager, and when she was 14, she fell for a punk rocker who was about 16, and he was wild also. Rather than banning her daughter from seeing this boyfriend and potentially pushing her daughter away, her mother clearly thought the best way to deal with the situation was to keep an eye on it, and so she allowed Angelina to move him into the family home. Angelina said, "I lost my virginity when I was 14. We were in my bedroom, in my environment where I was most comfortable, and I wasn't in danger. I was very young, but kids are doing a lot of weird things these days, and they're getting very promiscuous. We lived together for 2 years with my mum, so I wasn't sneaking around. Unlike other girls, I wasn't partying and hanging out on the street." It is interesting to note that at this point, the boyfriend had been moved in. That is often a way of controlling an individual to have such cohabitation occur very early on in the relationship, and also bear in mind that this was taking place when she was just 14. Her behaviour still left a lot to be desired. Her school friend explained that it was a pretty strange living arrangement, but her mother made the best of it. She explained that around this time she started to lose interest in school completely, possibly showing therefore a lack of accountability. Angelina Jolie since defended her decision to be so serious with someone so young, saying, "Are you ever emotionally developed enough to be involved in that kind of relationship? That strikes me as a diminution of responsibility. He lived in our house with my mum and my brother, so it wasn't like we were on our own, and I could always talk to mum if there were any problems. She was more connected and aware of what was going on than most mothers. She knew I was at that age where I was going to be looking around. Either it was going to be in weird situations or it was going to be in my house, in my room." Jolie has always been insistent that it was her mother rather than her father who instilled in her a love of acting. One thing that her mother did not anticipate was the fact that these outings sparked her daughter's fascination with knives. She explained, "I went to the Renaissance Fair when I was a little girl, and there were all these knives. There's something really beautiful and traditional about them. Different countries have different weapons and blades, and there's something beautiful about them to me. So I began collecting knives. I've collected weapons since I was a little girl." That fascination with an inanimate object is demonstrative of the objectification that certain personality types go through. Also, it would be used for the purposes of triangulating people with this interest in knives, and, as I mentioned earlier on, might be seen as a lack of conformity with lawful behaviours. Jolie continued by explaining, "Some people go shopping. I cut myself. I started having sex, and sex didn't feel like enough. And my emotions didn't feel like enough. My emotions kept wanting to break out. In a moment of wanting something honest, I grabbed a knife and cut my boyfriend, and he cut me." That behaviour shows the possibility of experiencing an emptiness that she's seeking to fill. Moreover, by cutting her boyfriend, there's an absence of emotional empathy and a lack of boundary recognition in that moment. She explained that her boyfriend was a really good person, that he was a sweet guy, that they had this exchange of something, and they were covered in blood, and she said that her heart was racing and it was something dangerous. Life suddenly felt more honest than whatever this sex was supposed to be. It felt so primitive, and it felt so honest. But then I had to deal with not telling my mother, hiding things, wearing bandages to school. She said it was a desperate need to feel. When I was young, I didn't have a self of my own. This is an interesting admission. As you know, the narcissist has no sense of self. The true self has arrested, and a false self is projected. Nevertheless, that she feels that she doesn't have a sense of identity, and explained that she lived through the characters that she played and became lost in different parts of her personality. During one S&M session, Jolie asked her lover to draw a blade across her jawline, and there is still a faint scar there today. Looking back, she said, he was somebody that I wanted to help me break out, and I would get frustrated, potential threat to control, when he wouldn't help me. The cutting could not help her either. In fact, it almost killed her. After one particular incident where she slashed her neck, she cut an X into her arm and sliced into her stomach. She was rushed to hospital. I nearly cut my jugular vein, she admitted in 2000. By the time I was 16, I had gotten the self-harming out of my system. She then decided that she had had enough of living with her mother and her boyfriend aged 16, and she decided to take an apartment across the street and move. The boyfriend assumed that he was moving in with her, but she kicked him out, and that was the end of the relationship. From going from talking about someone that she viewed as so sweet and having this commonality of interest in cutting one another, she suddenly kicks him to the curb, which might suggest a disengagement by a narcissist. It might also suggest an absence of emotional empathy. She explained that it was a tough breakup, that the relationship felt like a marriage, that he cried a lot, and it was just a load of high drama that I could do without. This is a dismissive attitude with regard to this individual, and also demonstrates an absence of emotional empathy. One of the neighbours remembers an occasion when the police had to be called because of the loud music coming from the flat in the early hours of the morning. The neighbour said, "My God, they would wake the dead, dancing and yelling and playing their music. It was a happy day when she moved." Again, that shows a sense of entitlement and a lack of consideration for other people. By reference, with hindsight to these times, Angelina Jolie said, "The doctor was probably going on about my father and mother while I was doing acid and bleeding under my clothes. I think now that if someone would have taken me at 14 and dropped me in the middle of Asia or Africa, I'd have realised how self-centred I was, and that there was real pain and real death and real things to fight for. I would not have been fighting myself so much." But that response is that she may well be looking back at that and thinking, okay, in order to explain that away and nullify the current threat to control, I will admit that I was self-centred back then. It possibly was the case that she was self-centred and grew out of it. After all, she was still a teenager and therefore did not, in effect, know her own mind. But many of the behaviours that she engaged in provide indicators, although they may not be determinative. In Part 4, we will continue the examination of her past and to address when she became a model. Join me there.